If you're having trouble with the midpoint formula, I'm fixing to help you out. So this is the formula for finding the midpoint or one of the missing endpoints to points on a coordinate plane. But before we get started with this formula, let's just look at what happens on a regular number line if you try to find 2 points. So if I have a number line and I have a point at 2 and a point at 8 and I want to find the midpoint, I could count my spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Half of 6 is going to be 3, so I'm going to go over 1, 2, 3 spaces, and this will get me in the middle. But what if it's some really big numbers or a really long line that I can't count all those spaces? Well, another way is to say, add your 2 numbers together. Whatever the 2 endpoints are, add those together. 2 plus 8 is equal to 10. Since I'm looking for the midpoint, let's divide that by 2, which is 5, and look, that's the number that we would have landed on. So shortcut there, if you're on a number line, add the 2 endpoints together, divide by 2, and that gets you right in the middle. Okay, now let's look at how this relates to what's on a coordinate graph. Okay, so here's the scenario on a coordinate graph. We have a line segment that goes between these 2 points, and we want to find this midpoint here. Well, let's just look at this definite example I have. This segment starts at the point 1, 3, and it goes to the point 13, 9, and the midpoint is at 7, 6. So let's look at this relationship for just a second without the line. What if it's just the points? Notice that every point in our scenario has 2 numbers associated with it. So what are those 2 numbers for? Well, that's how you get there. If you remember, when you're graphing a point, the first number tells you how far to go to the right or left. The second number tells you how far to go up or down. So in this scenario, I'm going over 1 up 3, over 7 up 6, over 13 and 9. So 2 line segments make a point, over and up, or over and down, or whatever, depending on which quadrant you're in. So let's look at these numbers. My points here are at 1, 3, and 7, 6, and 13, 9. Let's take this down. So here's the 3 points that I was dealing with. You've got endpoint 1, endpoint 2, and then your midpoint. Well, all of the x's are related. Every x tells you how far to the right you're going. First you went 1, then you went 7, then you went 13. So my midpoint, the x number, was halfway in between these 2 x's. So I could have used the same technique that we used on just the number line. I could have said 1 plus 13, that's endpoint 1 plus endpoint 2, is 14, and then I could have divided that by 2, and look, you get the x from your midpoint. Now let's see if that works for the y's. My y would have been 3 plus 9, which is 12. If I divide that by 2, what do you get? 6, which is the y of your midpoint. This is basically what the midpoint formula is. So let's look at it again. Okay, so here's this horrendous looking formula again. But let's break it up into the components that we already know made it up. Now, this is 1 point. This was the point of our midpoint. So in our scenario, if we look at how this relates to the formula, the xm and the ym, that's the ordered pair that describes your midpoint. This is pair number 1 and this is pair number 2, and it doesn't matter whether you put 1, 2 or 2, 1. You just have to be consistent. So I just usually go 1 and 2. So what they did in the formula is x1 plus x2. So they add the 2 x's together, divide by 2, and that gets you the x in your midpoint. You add your 2 y's together, divide by 2, and that gets you the y in your midpoint. So that's where the formula comes from. This one formula helps you find two numbers. So let's look at a couple of scenarios. You can have a problem where you get two endpoints and you're missing the midpoint, or you can have a problem where you have an endpoint and a midpoint and you want the other endpoint. So let's look at those two problems. We want to find the midpoint of a segment from 7, 1 to negative 3, 1. So the first thing I do is I label these two. Now these are endpoints because they're asking us for the midpoint. So I label these number 1 and number 2. So I'll know if I've got an x1 or an x2, y1, y2. I'm looking for this. Now remember, you have 2 points. Each point has 2 numbers to get to it, 2 coordinates. So what we're going to find is 2 separate numbers. We're looking for an ordered pair. Okay? So let's plug this in. Our x midpoint, which we're looking for, and the y midpoint is over here. Then I'm going to plug in x from pair number 1, which is 7, plus the x from pair number 2, which is negative 3. And that will be over 2. Then we're going to plug in our y coordinates. Our y coordinates. So now we have 1 plus 1, that's this y plus this y over 2. And then let's reduce these down. 7 plus negative 3 is positive 4 over 2. It's just a comma. And 1 plus 1 is 2 over 2. And then when we reduce this down, 4 over 2 is 2. And 2 over 2 is 1. So now we have an ordered pair, 2, 1. And if you could graph this, if you went over 7 and up 1 and then down 3 and over 1, you're going to see this point is right in the middle. That's what the midpoint formula finds for you. This gets you over 2 and up 1. So now let's look at one where we have the endpoint and a midpoint and we're looking for the other endpoint. Now let's look at this scenario. Given the endpoint 5, 2 and the midpoint 3, 4, find the other endpoint. So there's a line segment and we know one end and then we know the midpoint. We're looking for this other endpoint. We're going to use the same formula. We're just going to plug into different parts of it because we're going to let this be pair number 1 just like we did in the other one. This is not pair number 2 though. This is this one. So when we fill it, and I'll label it M, when we fill this in, now remember we're looking for 2 numbers because we need an x coordinate that tells us how far to go to the right or left to get there, and a y coordinate that tells us how far to go up or down. So let's fill this into this formula. First of all, xm comes from the x coordinate of our midpoint, so that's 3. Ym comes from the midpoint also. So we have this. Now, the x from pair number 1 is 5. The x from pair number 2 is what I don't know. So that's what I'm going to put x here. It's still over 2. And this is a part of an ordered pair. Now let's get the y's. I need the y from pair number 1, which is 2. Plus the y from pair number 2, which I don't know. So that's going to be y over 2 as well. Now what you have at this point is a setup for 2 equations, not 1, because remember we're looking for 2 numbers. So we're going to set this up. Take the x coordinate of your midpoint and set that equal to the x coordinate of this formula over here. So we have 5x, or 5 plus x over 2. Now on the other side, your y midpoint, 4, is going to be equal to this expression over here, 2 plus y over 2. Now we just need to solve these real quickly and we'll know what the endpoint is. Since this is a fraction over 2, just multiply the whole thing by 2. So that's going to give you 6 equals, 2 times 3 is 6. Now when you multiply 2 times this fraction, this 2 is going to cancel out your denominator. So you have 5 plus x, and then you would subtract 5 from each side. So that's going to give you x is equal to 1. Now you can see it. X equals 1. Alright, same thing over here. We have this fraction over 2. So to get rid of the fraction, I'm going to multiply by the denominator. When I multiply 2 times 4, I'm going to get 8. 2 times this fraction right here just cancels out the denominator. So I have 2 plus y. Subtract 2 from each side, and y is equal to 6. So the ordered pair that gives you the other endpoint for this scenario is at x coordinate 1 and y coordinate 6. If you could graph 5, 2 and 1, 6, you would see that the point 3, 4 is right in the middle. So I hope this helps y'all solve those midpoint problems. Come back for some more math help. Bye.